my leg! Oh! Get it off! Oh!
Quit your belly aching. Nothing Samosian won't sort out. He'll come out to wages, mind.
Father!
We're not running charity, Ada.
Here, drink this.
Oh, thank you, Mum. Oh, that's much better, thank you.
Hello?
Good evening. You're trespassing.
Trespassing?
Hello and welcome to the LARP News podcast. My name's Dave and I'm joined by my fellow podcaster Ian, as always. Say hello.
Hello.
And we've got a guest on this evening to talk about a few things. Ellie, would you like to introduce yourself and what you can do at Empire?
Yep, so I'm Ellie Williams and I play Gabriella Barossa at Empire, and she is the bursar of the Anvil Hospital. So she does a lot of kind of hospital admin and, getting stuck up to her elbows in other people's fake blood. And I do a lot of the organisation out of character for the hospital as well.
And the hospital's a really interesting part of Empire because it's, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ellie, it really was born by the players. It's not something that PD actually set up, and you guys really built it from the ground up. As
basically,
something to really influence the world of Empire, and I think it's a really exciting part of the game. As is with the whole physic game, actually, in general, which I'm sure we'll touch on.
It's almost part of legend when you're a new player. Is like, the hospital, players created that. Like, it's one of those like. It's a talking point that like it's a cool thing when you first hear it, and it's good to share when you hear about it. So,
well, it's actually quite rare, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's actually like those kind of it feels very formal, it feels very established, right? But those kind of elements of play, if you like, are quite rare that they have that sort of, as I say, that very kind of formal kind of existence within the world that is purely player created. And I think the hospital is probably one of the strongest examples of that in all of the event.
It might be, it's importantly, it's communal, right? Like, there are lots of player-made structures in the game, right? But the hospital is a communal experience that was created by players. Sorry, Ellie, we're very excited to talk to you, as you can tell, right?
It's a really exciting part of the game. In fact, it's one of the first places we actually ever went.
Awesome. Fantastic.
Yeah, we heard about it, and we literally were told to go to the hospital.
Yeah. And
hopefully for fun reasons rather than rocking up going, oh, bleeding to death.
No,
but
just to
you'd make our day if you had. Yeah, so I've been playing Empire since year 1 E1.
Mm-hmm.
So I've actually been playing the same character since then. Somehow have managed to survive since then. I think my character's been on 14 battles. Managed to survive that.
Dave, you gotta pull your socks up.
I know, right?
But
I've
as a
only
medic,
survived it just over a year. It's embarrassing, yeah.
But I mean, for anyone who's listening to the last episode, though, like Tim Baker is in my group, so I tend to run around after him, and he's very good at rescuing people. So
okay,
that's quite good.
That's good.
But yeah, when I first rocked up, there was no hospital.
Yeah. So talk to me about like when did you see like a need for this, right? Like, so usually everyone went off to battle or off to skirmishes and they immediately got kicked out and they just left to wander aimlessly around.
So on the very first event, when there was no hospital, there were 3 players. Let's see if I can remember the character names. There's Anis Ramsbrook, there was Elizabeth Talbot, and there was Dr. Levy. And these were played by 3 fairly experienced LARPers who had decided that they wanted to establish a hospital. And they hadn't decided altogether. There were like 2 marchers and 1 high guard person. But they found each other in the field trying to do the same thing, which was to get as many sort of physics as they could in the same place on Friday night, the first Anvil, very first Empire, to go, look, we should try and organise ourselves because there are going to be some big battles. There's going to be people being hurt. We should try and get our act together and work out what we're going to do. And so from that sort of first genesis, we had one very big meeting on the Friday night of the first Empire. I think it was the Friday night. It might have been the Saturday. It was a long time ago. Trying to work out what people wanted from a hospital, what they thought might be useful, whether there was actually a desire for it or not. And it was a very mixed feeling. Like, some people were like, yes, we definitely want it. That would be amazing. We're in. We'd love to help. But there are lots of people who are like, oh no, well, we want to look after our own people in our own camps, which is a very kind of valid in-character response to kind of go, no, actually, we want to look after our own people. We want to be able to do it this way. But what came out of that was that there was enough support for it that they could get representatives from every nation on board to then start putting together a more formal structure for the hospital, to work out what we actually wanted out of it, what we wanted to do, how we wanted to go about establishing ourselves in game. And right back at the start, we had no tent or anything like that. We were just a group of people meeting.
How many people were in that initial group, would you say? Of the you say you had one from each nation, but like how many people in total do you think that was?
Of keen people, probably about 20, I'd say.
Right, interesting.
So it's the 3 core people who took on like the role of kind of librarian, chancellor, and bursar.
And this is another aspect, because I assume ultimately funding had to be found, and then that had to go through the political game in order to actually get that funding. Or was it purely payer funded?
Yeah.
So a bit of both. So basically, once we just sort of established what we're doing, we started then getting to the business of actually like saving people. So it was, some people were organising triage, and that wasn't initially. So people kind of compiling out of the gate, and you have to work out who's about to die instantly and who's not, and who's treating, and who can just like be allowed to wander off. Or, if they're going to wander off, like make sure their mates keep an eye on them, that kind of thing. Because obviously anyone can do anything they want when they come through the gate. They don't have to come and stop at the hospital. But if people stop, we want to make sure that they're triaged. That process wasn't integrated with the hospital at all to start with. It was a group of Navari who was organising that. But they worked alongside the people who were then doing the treatment of the people they triaged. And at the very start, we didn't have a tent. So we had the additional logistical problem of trying to move everyone from the gate to, I don't know if you know there's a big town hall tent effectively in the marches.
Is that the one where the pub is?
Merricks. It was the Merricks.
Oh, I don't know whether I've been there. I've been to a couple of pubs, but that's about it in the marches.
Yeah, well, it's a pub. It's like
maybe I have
like
then. There's a giant, big white one, basically. Is that the thing?
It was a big green one at the time, and they let us use their tent just after battles as basically a triage, as a treatment station. Because back then, you had to have an undercover structure to treat certain wounds. The rules have since changed, but right at the start, it meant that you couldn't treat traumatic wounds on the battlefield.
Cheeky PD, that is cheeky. Yeah. My God,
you had to bring people back and get them into a structure, so a tent, which we didn't have to start with. And for about 3 games, we used the Merricks, but it was rapidly becoming apparent that there was more people keen for the idea of a hospital, and more patients coming through than we would initially anticipate with all the skirmishes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think after the first couple of maybe 2 or 3 games, the initial 3, the executive, so the 3 founders, started renting a tent from PD. And they did this at their own expense.
Right. Wow.
But PD were very happy to give them like space up near the gate where we could then pitch the tent. And then that became the hospital. And then after a little while, it became popular enough that we basically said to PD, look, if you give us the tent for free, we'll put it up and take it down, but we're creating a lot of game for people. What do you think? And they said yes. So now we get the tent every time, but it's up to us to put it up and take it down.
It's a phenomenal part.
It's added so much to the game.
I think that's totally fair, though. I think that's a really good deal for everyone all around, really.
Yes, I think so. Definitely.
I think it's actually probably worth talking just generally about, in a very brief way, about injuries and healing and those kind of things for people who have not actually been to Empire or who are yet to attend their first event, just so they know what roughly to expect.
Terrible things.
Remember all the exact rules and things like that.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen to you, right?
And there's been like a whole year since I've had to do this.
Yes, me too.
Well, speaking.
So everyone has a bleed count. Sorry.
No, please go on, Ellie.
So everyone has a bleed count. So a certain number of seconds that you can live before, once you've been taken down to 0 hits, before you effectively bleed out and die. And I want to say 3 minutes, which I think is right.
That's the approximate average for your starting person. Yeah,
No,
your starting character, but then you
varies.
can increase that with potions. You can increase that with skills. There's various ways that can be longer.
Yeah.
And if you get taken down to 0 hits, then you start bleeding out. And unless someone with an appropriate skill gets to you in time, your character's going to die. That skill can be something like a Chirurgeon, who can just stop you dying and get you back up to 1 hit. It could be someone like a Physic, who has the ability to do other things to try and get you back up to full hits, so the use of herbs or things like that. Or it can be someone with "stay with me" or "get it together," some kind of heroic skill that can kind of pull you back up to your feet. Or as my character's husband says, the application of the medicinal boot. Get back up! Kick.
I love it.
There are mages as well, right? Ian was just saying that there are
mages, heal spells,
and stuff like that.
So you can,
and there's swift heal, which is great. It does very quickly. Or there's slower ones that give you more healing or can do more people at a time.
But interestingly, it's amazing. I really want to dive into the actual Physic game in general later, because it's a real a love of mine, actually. But other things that can happen to you on the field, just so people are aware of the context of everything, are things like traumatic wounds and other things. So I'll let you dive into it, because you know more than me.
If you are lucky, then you will have kind of gone down in such a dramatic fashion, or been up against such great odds, or been fighting such an important foe, that a ref will come along and will hand you a little card, and that little card will be a traumatic wound. And on one side of that card, it will say traumatic wound, and on the back, it will give you the effect. So you feel winded and can't breathe properly, or you've lost feelings in your legs, or you can't see properly, or you've got a headache. And some things say, if this is not treated within half an hour, see a ref. If this is not treated within 5 hours, see a ref. Or various different things like that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't tell you what's happened, it only tells you the effect. Now, these are laminated kind of double-sided cards, which means that when a Physic gets to you, and it can only be a Physic, it can't be a Chirurgeon, it can't be a Mage, it's got to be a Physic, they have the ability to tear open that card, and on the inside is more of a descriptor of what's actually happened. So shortness of breath might turn into you've punctured a lung, or your ribs are cracked, or
so good.
You've got a headache, might be as much as you've got a mild concussion, go have a cup of tea. Or it might be you've got a cranial bleed, you need to be trepanned.
The moment when
the symptoms might be the same, but until you open the card, you don't know.
But when you've got one and you're like, you hand it to the Physic or whatever, and they stand above you and they rip it open and they go, ooh. Or even better, didn't you, Ian? You gave one to someone and went, oh, I've got this, and then they were like, all right, clear the way, we need to get this person in there. And they like...
Well, I've had two. So I had one like that, and I've also had one where they're like, I don't know what to do. And they had literally had to take, get somebody but they were RPing someone who was obviously like a new Physic, and they were like, I think they did, because it does actually quite relatively well tell you like the process necessary to cure the thing.
It does.
But they were really well RPing like this kind of a fairly new Physic. So they went off to go and get someone else, like a more senior Physic to come and help me, and it was so good. The traumatic wound experience is absolutely amazing.
For both sides of the equation.
Yes, definitely from both sides.
But I've been on both sides of the equation.
Yes,
I've done healing and I've done the being injured. And oh my goodness, it's so good. And you don't lose anything by drawing more people in to help you. It's not like I'm the big Physic, I can do it. It's like the more people I get in to help, the more we can do, the more RP we can make. It's just it's brilliant.
It's such a deep part of the game. Yeah. It's doing battlefield surgery and playing as a battlefield medic is amazing, like absolutely incredible. And I'll just, if you'll forgive me, I'll just quickly dive into that because it's a real. But like in battles, there's the immediate way of being the sort of the normal way you'd think of being heroic, killing the monster, saving the people, those kind of things. But there's that thing that I think we can all identify with, and the heroes we see prominently in the world now, of course, and always respect, which of course the healers, the people throughout history who have always looked after people, right, and are carers. And to get to play that role where you can have that moment, which is actually quite a kind of an immediate and intimate moment with another player, where you can save their lives. And there's you kind of have to talk to the person, check they're okay with things, but like having people like holding your hand, and as they're sort of in pain and crying out, telling that what their last words or last wishes might be, things like this. I mean, and these moments of RP they're just so immediately arresting that. And you'll be in the turmoil of battle or outside of battle, and these things can happen at any moment. And you're all of a sudden you're wrapped into a very, very personal, very extreme, and sometimes funny, sometimes dramatic moment of RP. I mean, literally the very first moment of RP I had in all of Empire was, so I turn up as a physic, and we're kind of walking around not knowing what to do. And there's this guy who's got 3 arrows in him, and he's being dragged back to his camp. He had this awesome kind of costume sort of all set up in Navarre. And obviously this was a whole sort of process that had been made by the group themselves to represent this person who died in the previous event or something like that. I don't know. But I was Johnny on the spot, and they were like, we need a physic. And I just happened to be there, and like the guys just sort of pushed me forward. And I was just all of a sudden thrust into sort of trying to help this person. I got given this laminated card. I had no idea what I was doing. Literally my very first interaction with the game, opened it, and it just the experience of everyone, this whole group of people around you. I mean, I just got pushed away in a sense by someone who was much more experienced, but that was in really good RP. But it was just so amazing to then, as I was holding this guy's hand as he died, and he was like gripping my hand, and it was just like, it was so intense. I was just like, I'm sure from the outside it maybe didn't look that way, but for me that connection was just so immediate, and I was like, geez, that's an incredible adrenaline rush, right? And there's been so many battles I've had that experience, and being the injured person, have someone else save you. I mean, it's amazing. Ian, sorry.
Ian, let Ellie speak.
No, it is. It's amazing. I was thinking, that gave me a chance to like think of all the fun like physics stories that I've had. So one of the first battles on that moment where you're like so wrapped up in things that you're not aware of your surroundings, or like you've just got to ignore them because you're trying to save this person. My friend had been taken down with an arrow to the thigh. So that's the other thing, is that arrows and things like cleave do extra damage, as it were, in the sense that you need to do a bit more to fix them. So they're not as bad as traumatic wounds, and you can fix them on the battlefield, but instead of taking like 30 seconds, they take like 2 whole minutes to fix. And so my friend had taken arrows to the leg, and I really didn't want to use the herbs on him because I don't know if I even had the right kind of herb at the time. So I was like, okay, I'm going to fix. Yeah, cerulean mazarine. Oh, gold dust.
It's at a premium. It's really at a premium sometimes.
Yes. I spend half my time on the field currently buying and selling herbs, or buying herbs. So I will talk about that later. But I was trying to fix this guy. So I'm like, okay, 2 minutes. The battle is raging around us. And there are these hydras that are stalking the field, like these drake-like hydras. And there are these guys in these big kind of dragon suits. And they've got very limited vision, but they've got poison breath. And so I'm there fixing this guy, and one of them is coming closer to us as the battle rages around us. I'm just like, we're just going to stay very still. We're going to hide by this tree, and I'm going to fix your leg, and then we are going to go. And it goes, like its tail was within about a foot of me as it just walked past, but it was so distracted by everybody else that we just kind of slunk there, very quietly fixing this guy's leg. And it didn't notice that we got away with it. But there have been other ones that's been like on Anvil, which have been really good as well. And that idea that you can kind of get loads of people in to help, and it can be really kind of intense. There was one time when a friend of mine had a kind of a curse, because sometimes you get normal traumatic wounds, but you also get magical traumatic wounds, which is where you can fix them physically, but they have a magical origin. And so this one was due to someone who had felt they had broken an oath.
Yes.
And so it gave them kind of some magical backlash, which was this small parasite that was kind of going around their body. And you had to kind of trap it and then surgery it out. So it was like this little worm thing that was creeping under your skin.
Like off, is it The Mummy? That makes me think of the Mummy,
Little
right?
scarabs
Yes.
going on
Yeah.
Those
the
little,
tummy. Yeah.
Yeah.
so utterly horrific. But it turned out when this hit her, there were actually about 4 physics in the room at the time, just by coincidence.
Yeah.
So we were all kind of there, kind of holding her steady and kind of getting our little bits of kit out. Like, I think someone had a little glass flask that they could pretend to heat up to put over as a suction cup to keep it in place, and the rest of us were getting our needles out and drawing it out.
The props that people have.
In that moment, we were just so engaged in it, and it's just that intense moment. It's so good.
It is like, honestly, like I would really recommend it. One of the best decisions I ever made walking into the game was to choose to take on the physic game. And like, to be honest, now I actually don't do as much as I used to. I kind of am more of an archer than a physic these days. But just as an experience, and if you're if you're not maybe sure about what your kind of keys into the game are going to be, actually the healer game, whichever route and path you choose to take, has so many avenues that can take you to those really interesting elements of RP that you maybe can't as easily find by saying, oh, I'm going to be a trader, or I'm going to be a warrior, or whatever, those kind of archetypes. The healer, there's a lot to it, and in a really kind of immediate and yet kind of accessible way. And this, like, you can literally go to the hospital and introduce yourself, which is what I did, as a new physic in town, and essentially just be like, hi, I'm new, and there's really friendly people who will, teach you the ropes and sort of tell you to hang around, and I kind of hung around the hospital and helped a little bit there, and then but these moments of RP that will crop up are just, I really do strongly recommend it if you're not sure about where you're going to take your character. A physic, or it is just incredible. It's great.
I think everyone always loves the healer because you've always got something to do, and when you need a healer, you really need a healer.
Yes.
So I think it's a great role for knowing what your purpose is if you're otherwise a little bit not sure. So if in doubt, it's like, well, that I will be needed at some point. Someone will call for a physic, or I can go up to the hospital, or if I'm on the battlefield, undoubtedly it will be necessary. So I think it can give you a lot of initial direction, and then from that, you can work out, well, am I going to specialize in something, or am I going to branch out, or am I going to get involved in politics? But it gives you that thing that, I mean, no, other than the person who's injured, who's probably got mixed feelings about it, people aren't unhappy to see a healer, because usually when they need you.
The amount of times that, I've had to yell out physic, no one's going to yell out physic for something boring. Whatever someone's yelling about, it's probably something that's going to be really fun to witness or be involved in or see, right? Like when I got my leg cleaved in that incident, and I was yelling physic while crawling along the ground on my way back to the Navarre camp. And it's just a really fun. I can only imagine what that's like for other people to see, like someone just crawling through the ground yelling for a physic, and then a random physic's like, do you have any herbs? And I'm like, no. And he's like, oh, for God's sake, now I'm going to have to... Takes 2 minutes, right? The guy's a busy guy. He's got things to do.
But I would always leap on that 2 minutes, because it's like, I get to do 2 minutes of surgery at least.
It actually ended. It ended in an altercation where the physic was basically having to say, "Listen, let me fix his leg, and you can do whatever you're gonna do, and I'll fix whoever's left." All right. So and it was one of those bizarre situations where the guy just wanted to finish his job like a professional and then get on with the rest of his day. It's fantastic.
But physics as well, and I think this is the other thing. If you're listening to any of this and feeling a little bit intimidated by the intensity that we're bringing, because it's super exciting. But also, you can choose, your gear of where you're going to be doing things. You can just, do fairly routine things. I encourage you to really push it, because it really is fantastic.
We should.
There's some really interesting things that.
Quickly, we should talk about consent really quickly before we get any further into this, and just get that out the way before anything else, right? So, Ellie, would you like to explain your understanding of what consent as a physic might involve?
So basically, it's a very important outer character whenever you're treating someone, to establish what level of contact that they are happy with and what level of interaction they're happy with. So when someone's sort of brought into the hospital, the first thing you would do before you do anything is kind of say, probably lean in and whisper out to character, are you okay with me touching you while I do this? Do you want me to take your do you want to take your armor off? are you okay with fake blood? And it's just checking what level of interaction they're comfortable with. And a lot of people just be like, yeah, that's fine. But if they're like, oh, actually, no, then you'd be like, that's fine. We can do this completely non-contact. It doesn't have to be contact at all. Would you be, you ask them, are you happier sitting up or lying down? And so that just dropping out of character to check at points that they're okay with what you're going to do and to check what level of contact they're happy with is incredibly important. And the more that you do this, the more second nature it becomes to just be the first thing you say is that you'll get your tools out and you'll say, right, let's do this. And then you'll lean down and the first thing you will say is, are you okay with me touching you?
Having gone through that process, the best physics of the world, they're so good at it. From an external point of view, you wouldn't even know that someone had asked for consent. Like, I came in, I was dying, coming into the hospital, I'm screaming, I'm yelling, people come running over. First thing they do is, quick question, and then I'm like, I very briefly explain what the hell's going on in a very out of character, very quickly. I got injured in this way. I'm terminal. I just need you to apply loads of fake blood to me. Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
And then they put me down on the thing. Are you okay with this and this and this? And even after I said, I'm here for the blood, basically, they still made it very, they asked, like, are you okay with fake blood? I'm like, absolutely, go nuts. Like, more the merrier. Do you know what I mean? And then, I'm sure if you were 3 or 4 feet away, you would have no clue that we had that conversation OC. Like, it was so under the thing. But, yeah, really well played.
And it's one of those things where if you do it just very matter-of-factly, it doesn't really drop people out of their immersion because you're just like, a quick answer to this question, are you okay? And if they're not okay, then they're probably happy to be able to take that moment to tell you. If it's all too intense, then you can say, okay, let's get you somewhere quiet. Let's drop out of character. Let's find somewhere you can have a drink of water. Let's go to that quiet corner or take you out of the tent. Or if they are okay, let's just go with it.
Yeah.
I've had like a non-contact physic experience, and actually that opens up really interesting opportunities for RP because you can start doing things with incense and sort of, trying to use your herbs. I mean, I was, I had limited use of my imagination trying to think up things, but you can actually make it quite interesting, and it's in no way will it sort of impact the game. It's there's a lot of different opportunities, and this is why the physics game is so exciting, because every single case you come across, which I'm sure is in a sense part of, I guess, the buzz that a first responder gets, is interesting and exciting and has its own aspects to it. And on both sides,
you could do
like the
things
whole
so realigning energies, for example.
Yeah,
you could do things with balancing humours. So you could be like, drink something hot or drink something cold, or tap into your hearth magic. So if I've seen it done with like the Leaguish people, of getting people to remember their loyalties or telling them a terrible dramaturgy joke or things like that. And anything that taps into that hearth magic,
a song,
or possibly the patient's hearth magic, or a song, or getting them to talk through their tattoos if they're Navari or something like that. As long as it's 2 minutes of appropriate role play, that appropriate role play just has to be focused on the fact that you are trying to heal them. It doesn't have to be doing physical healing. It can be more metaphysical.
Yeah, if you want to get a Navari to speak for at least 2 minutes, ask them about their tattoos. I mean, my God, you'll be there half an hour. Do you know what I mean? Like, listen, you're fine. Get out of here. Go join the battle again. Jeez.
But yeah, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't the best doing this kind of incensey thing that I did, but I had a really good time. Is the sum of it, like, and I've had a really good time applying bandages and blood, and it's super exciting. Like, yeah, I've been jazzed about this whole conversation, by the way.
Getting a physic that's G'd up is amazing. Like because it's usually like often getting healed is a nice opportunity to rest sometimes, or take a time out from the battle, because it's not running around. You get knackered, you take some hit points. When I start getting down to maybe two, I'm a little bit like, am I needed here? Can I possibly go off and seek and find a physic? But those moments,
go find your physic before you fall over.
Always before you fall over, because one, you're a much bigger pain in the ass when you're on the ground and you're risking other people's lives. Two, on a selfish level, you're significantly more likely to die if you're already dead, right? So beware. Yeah.
Actually, a lot of people die simply because they don't get noticed. If you die in the wrong, if you are downed on the wrong area of the battlefield, the battle can be won, but you might be 50 yards away and your voice won't carry, and people will just not notice that you're down.
That happens. I think that's I think a lot of people die that way. That's how people die dead. You know, like I remember some battles where you're running around and you see a lone physic out in the field when the lines, when the lines get really messy on the big field and there's a lot of movement everywhere and you don't really know where the lines are and it's very dangerous. I'm a runner, so that's kind of, I enjoy that. That's where I like to be. But when you see a physic out there with like roving troops, you're like, you gotta go. It's not safe in there. Like, no. I need a minute, and then this person's good. And I'm like, I can't defend you. I'm gonna run as soon as they come over here. You just gotta go. Like, you can't. And I love those moments, right, where physics leaving a patient is, oh my god, like heartbreaking on the field, right? Sometimes they stay. You know.
Yeah, I've had like a time where it was me and this guy. He was cleaved, and I didn't have the stuff to heal him. And we were it was that first skirmish we had, Dave, where we were in this kind of wheeling motion, and the whole battlefield was essentially turning.
Was that a battle or was that a skirmish?
It's a skirmish. It was a big skirmish.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're getting kind of pushed around constantly, and I kept trying to like, put this guy down so I could work on his leg and heal him up. And then the line kept moving, and I'd be like, okay, we've got to go, and we were getting compressed from both sides. But so it turned this 2 minutes of RP into, like, no joke, like 5-6 minutes of just like constantly we're moving, we're keeping you alive, right? And I was like, to the stage where I was just saying to other people, like, you have to protect me, I have to heal this man and stuff. And then other people are involved. They're not even healers, but they're people who suddenly have agency in the battle, because you as a healer suddenly have almost like an element of battlefield command, like not in a kind of like, but you can say, like, this is important, right? We need to save this person, and I have nowhere to go. Protect me.
Physics are universally loved. Like, no one dislikes a physic, right? Like, there are many different things that you can look at in the game and be like, oh.
Well, not for being a physic, anyway.
What's that?
Well, not for being a physic, anyway.
Well, that's very true. That's very
I'm just like for a lot of other reasons.
But a physic isn't one of them. I remember one time that Ian gave the impression to us that if you're a physic, then you got given the good stuff when you went to the hospital. And after Ian got given like a serious injury or whatever, we rolled him in there, being Navarre, we were like yelling, someone go over here, someone saw this. Yeah, the whole caboodle, right? Get her. And I'm like yelling, he's a physic, so give him the good stuff, right? Like, I know how it works here, right? Like,
I think
the look on their faces was hilarious. They were like, yeah, really good.
I think what that actually is, that like generally if you're a physic, you're all about that game. And therefore other physics, healing physics, I think everyone is generally all in on it. So like, it was just a case of like, I was getting cut open and I was having people, looking at my lungs, all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's just like, this is amazing, right? I had like a little stick to bite down on. It was like,
Ellie,
that's what it's all about.
Would you say it takes a certain, how, let me phrase this very carefully, like a sadistic imagination to be a physic? Like,
I don't think so.
Not necessarily.
So I think that the cards, for example, the Insides of the Triumph Moon cards are really very good at giving you hints about what you should do and what you should be needing to do.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who's ever watched any MASH or ER or Casualty or anything like that can kind of tap into that urgency. I also think that anyone who's even like slightly interested in historical medicine or medicine itself or biology or science, that kind of stuff, like you can really tap into that side of things as well.
That
the
kind
wackier
of kooky old world science as well, where like, and that's where the props and stuff are like, someone will come out with some crazy blade and like, hang on, this looks like a torture device. And they're like, no, we're going to heal you with this.
So I would say that physics do tend to have a fairly, at least there's a strain of them that have a black sense of humor. And so you'll be like, oh, this terrible thing happened, or this kind of other event happened, and wasn't it
Mm.
funny? And everyone else is going, what? Or one of my in-character cousins and I have great conversations about the most interesting traumatic wounds we've ever seen. Purely for partly because we like sharing those stories, and partly because we like seeing whether we can turn the other people who are listening green.
Mm. But I think
Because
Sorry,
this is
no,
great fun.
I think there is a real worldness to that. I mean, my mum's a radiographer, and we used to sort of hang around with a bunch of people in the medical profession, and there is an element of kind of not like, as you say, like black humor, kind of gallows humor. There is a little bit of that, right? Because if you're exposed to these things, sometimes you're put in extreme situations. I mean, this happens in other professions, but it is an intense environment, and you have to find.
All I want to do right now is die and be reborn as a really like butcher physic. That's all. Just listen to you guys talk right now. Just, I bring them over. Oh, we're not going to save this one, and be really like just ridiculous about the whole thing. That sounds like amazing. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun.
There are so many ways to play it. Like, I've also had someone who was like a super clean, super clinical, like, really analytic kind of like, I don't really watch House, but I think he's like a very kind of analytical kind of person, right? Like that kind of sort of style, where it's just like really is doing it all by the numbers and is super calm and unfazed,
like emotionless, almost, right?
Yeah, like this, I am fixing you kind of thing, right? And it's like you're kind of screaming, hollering, is like get a grip of yourself, like
honestly, you've sold me. You've sold me. In the
great.
time I've been sitting
so
here,
good.
I'm like, wow, this sounds really great. Like, it's instant, like, full-on RP, whoever you're interacting with. You can, if you do it in a nice, safe, responsible way, the sky's the limit with how much you want to get involved. Like, remember we talk sometimes about how you can sometimes have goals at Empire, right? And that sometimes you can get caught up in ideas of plots or making something happen, and you can spin your entire, and you kind of lose focus of why you're there. It's the RP, right? And like maybe physicking's one of those things where you get to really, it's like, I try and get maybe 3 really intense, like, I forget about the world, I'm completely immersed. I want 3 moments like that in a weekend of Empire. That's usually my, if I hit 3 of them, maybe it takes me a couple of days to realize it, right? Because you're in the moment. But that's my aim. A physic, I mean,
dude, you can get 3 of those in a battle, easy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's like, sorry, go for it, dude.
I was going to say a goal for me for an Empire would be have a cool moment in the hospital, like treat a patient with an injury, and like that will be a cool moment. And it almost doesn't matter who the patient is or what the injury is, but you can make that moment cool.
I think
the other nice thing sorry, go on.
No, I think there's that aspect of in other areas of the game, you kind of will pursue things and RP will happen almost on your clock, on your sort of say. But with the physic game or the healer game in general, because of course there are other options than just physic, that's important to state. But there's the idea that RP can be thrust upon you, and of course you can always opt out of it, but it in a way where those moments of really awesome RP can literally just come at any moment, and you'll have to roll with it, and that's super exciting. The RP will find you sometimes, and often when you're going to an event, you are kind of worrying about, how am I going to find RP? Well, as a healer, RP will find you often.
Yeah.
And there's not actually that many areas of the game where you can necessarily say that is true. In that kind of intensity.
Ellie,
so I think that's one of the.
Sorry,
can I?
No, please do. Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that the hospital does really nicely is giving a location where these things can happen. So it's the kind of thing where if someone's injured on Anvil, which happens but isn't that common, yes, they might have physics of their own, or there might be physics nearby or healers nearby, but they know that if they want some cool RP and they don't have anyone else present, they can go to the hospital and someone will be there. Now, it also means that if you're hanging around, you don't quite know where you want to hang around, and you don't quite know what to do, but what you want to do is heal people. If you go up and hang around at the hospital, then people will come to you, either from a skirmish or from a battle or for something else. But there's always going to be sort of medics up there talking to each other as well in the quiet times, and tidying up or chatting or talking about things, or teaching or telling you stories.
There's a really cool camaraderie in the whole physic game, in the whole healer game, where you can. There is a type of fraternity that you can kind of bond into. Like we've all healed people. You know, we've all brought people to the hospital. We've all, we've all got that story, right? We've all got that. Oh, I shouldn't have been able to save this person, or I lost this person, and that's super cool. Like I've had a moment where I was like, there was a guy dying, and the reason I didn't heal him in time was because I didn't want to essentially drop a cup. Just because he literally was like, his timer was ticking down. I was more worried about this cup than and like in an OC kind of weirdness kind of way than actually kind of getting over to him and healing him. And it just like, it's one of those things where like now my character has that, right? My character has that he actually failed and he didn't get there in time, and it was within my power, and that's a cool thing, right? That's something that's part of my game now. It's super cool. And I think the hospital, it's almost like there is kind of a big stage element to it, because you have that kind of intimate setting of healing inside, say, your nation, or inside your own steading or striding or banner or whatever your equivalent is. But sort of healing and acting as a healer around the hospital, that's almost like the big stage kind of setting. It feels that way sometimes, being able to triage after a battle. And sort of step up and say, I'm a healer, I'll help, even if you're not officially involved with the hospital, being able to step up is awesome.
I think the other thing is that, so the hospital's quite an interesting one. So so I've got a couple of points here. I think, what is the interesting divide between battlefield medics and people who don't go on the battlefield and heal up at the hospital, so more full time, as it were. And I think the hospital provides a really nice way for people who don't or can't go on the battlefield to really get stuck into the healing game in a big way.
Yeah.
Because for whatever reason, they don't go on the battlefield, and maybe it's mobility issues, maybe it's they just don't want to, maybe it's other things. Yeah. But it gives them a place where they can still get that buzz, still get that interaction, without having to force themselves on the battlefield or just miss out on it.
Yeah.
But then battlefield healers can come and get involved in the hospital too. So there's always that kind of balance of saying, well, you've been on the battlefield, so A, we need to check you over and make sure you're okay. But B, also it's not that you've had your fun, but you can let the other people have their turn now. But then if you're really short, all hands on deck, there's more people to treat than we can deal with. Then you can come off the battlefield and someone will say, right, you're okay. That's where you can get stuck.
I think they tend to ask, right? I remember one time that we came back and there was everyone had green lung, and it was just a shit fest. Basically, there was like people everywhere. There's not enough bodies to really deal with it.
Being a Navari, that's obviously and
we know the hospital so well because we're Navar. Like we regularly are outside there waiting after a battle. Like,
everyone's coughing, and you're doing the whole, the tea and kind of passing it around, all that kind of stuff. And and then of course, you can get involved that way. But I do actually like, that's a really good point, and something actually I hadn't considered before and I think that's something that I'll think about more is ensuring that I'm not sort of taking too much game when I come back from the battlefield. I do really enjoy it, but I think that is a really valid point.
I think it's not saying that you can't or you shouldn't. I think it's just that you need to be aware of the setup that's there, and that's not going to stop you. I don't think anyone's going to ever pull you off a patient or anything like that. No. But I think it's to be aware that there are lots of people waiting to get stuck in as well. Yeah. And
I think that's a really good point.
The more medics, the merrier, in a sense. There's always a chance to kind of say, right, well, I'm a medic. I'm okay. You've checked me over. I've just come back from the battlefield. Where can I be of help? And there's almost certainly always going to be an overflow area where you can wait for someone to come and be injured, and then you can help them. Or if you're lucky, it'll be nice and quiet and you won't be needed.
Yeah, which actually is often the case.
In character, you feel lucky, but out of character, you're like, oh damn, I was really hoping to fix it.
The hospitals, like whenever I've been in the hospital, like I find it quite a dynamic place, right? Like it can be very quiet in there, and then like I showed up there screaming bloody murder. It was after 20 minutes after the battle or something. It took me to get back to the thing or whatever. But that was kind of fun just to see it go from quiet to chaos. But when I was thinking specifically when we brought you in there.
Yeah.
Pull back the curtain. And okay, so everyone's outside. The whole army's outside, right? Everyone's adrenaline dumped. Some people are being OC, you know, like because of the adrenaline, everyone's happy or whatever. It's a fun time after a battle, right? Or sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like, oh no, we got our asses kicked. Anyway, you pull back that curtain, and it's a very large tent. It feels large when you go in there, but the scene is like, and when you mentioned it earlier when you mentioned MASH is exactly right, because you know, like MASH has those moments where they have the fun intro and it's the music and the helicopter shots, and they usually, with the first shot of the episode, is going to be them in the ER or something chaotic happening, the generator going down, dust over the... It's got that vibe when you walk in there as like just someone coming into the thing. It's chaotic, and what I like about the hospital when I've been in there is how strong some of the characters are. Like, then, you're a brave warrior who's just defeated how many enemies? Well, you can shut the fuck up while you're here. You will wait, or if I ask you to leave, you leave. Like, there's the Zulu, right? The guy of Zulu. That's how it feels sometimes. Is barking orders at people. I love it. It's fantastic.
Well, there's this wonderful feeling of I want to say soft power. That thing of, you know, I'm not a big warrior. I'm not, you know, going to kick your ass or anything like that. But this is my place. This is a hospital. This is my area of expertise. So you will listen to what I say. And I may be 5'6" and you might be 6'2", but gosh darn it, you are going to listen to me.
100%.
And it's one of the things I love about Empire is I could be like this reasonably small 5'6" person, and I can stare down people who are taller than me with all the confidence that this is what I'm. This is what I do. This is who I am.
What I'm trained for,
and
right?
And then people are generous enough with their role play to go with it and to let me have that moment. Yeah. And they roll with it. They're like, okay, yes, this is your place, and like by all rules, yes, I could just dominate here, but I'm not going to. I'm going to be generous, and that is that give and take of kind of going. This is my moment. This is your moment.
Exactly.
And I think that works with patients as well. Like when you're treating a patient, you have that give and take. You want to be able to treat them in a way that they can respond if they want to. So you can kind of give a countdown to what you're doing so that they know when to flinch or when to scream, or you can do sound effects at the right time to give them the idea of the emotion. Oh, there's a wonderful trick you can do involving a plastic shot glass.
Okay.
And a dislocated limb. So if someone's got like a dislocated shoulder or something like that, or the hip, what you do is you palm the plastic shot glass. This works best if they're wearing something like chainmail.
Yeah.
You palm it, you don't let anyone there see, and you'll get ready to pop it back in. And then as you pop it back in, you crunch.
Oh my god, that's amazing. That's amazing.
The shot glass, either in the hand that's pushing or in your other hand. And then they'll hear the crunch. And I mean, it can make them jump if they're not aware it's going to happen, or it just feels so much more kind of immersive.
Oh my god!
You know, actually,
you blew my mind.
Game,
oh my god!
My physics game actually weirdly has turned into a strange kind of like often because my kit is kind of quite limited at points sometimes. So like my physics game often does kind of devolve into like I'm going to pop limbs back and. And things like that, and kind of, almost like a kind of a weird kind of battlefield masseuse. It's kind of very strange. But
in fact, someone once asked you whether you were giving someone a genuine massage, right? Like you were an actual chiropractor. Someone didn't know whether you were IPing, right?
But like the idea of having a shot glass and using that like that, because I've just made sort of sounds of my, with my mouth before, essentially represent the popping back of limbs. That sounds amazing. Dude, that's like, actually I'm going to have to get me some of those. That's amazing.
Especially doing like the intros and outros, the idea of using sound effects to heighten what you're doing. Like you could get rocks in like a shaker or something and do something with that. There's all sorts of cool stuff you can do. And also if you're set up at the hospital,
then there's lots of space for you to do that. Like you can have your props tucked away and bring them out at the right time. So in a way, you can do that on the battlefield as well, but it's a lot easier to do it when you're kind of set up and ready to go in a tent.
Yeah, in fact, one of the one of the traumatic wounds I had, like having the person sort of open up one of those kind of, it was one of those multi-tiered kind of cases that sort of splays out, and all of the implements were there, and I was just, I broke up. It was, and I just said, that's amazing. Like, just I couldn't help myself. I was just like, I'm completely nerding out about how awesome that is. Like, thank you so much. It's just like, oh man, it's the fact that you don't actually need a lot of props to make an experience amazing. But of course, everything helps. Like having the bandages and having all those little things are awesome as well.
So what I think is that there's some bits. One thing that's really nice is the additive nature of the kit. Like you can start out with something really, really simple and gradually build it up and up and up until you're the person with the case that opens out, or the suitcase that has things, or the enormous bag. But I mean, I've actually, because I grabbed it, was like, I've got my tool roll here, which I know you can't see because it's a podcast, but
yeah, it looks amazing.
So on the, it's kind of leather on one side, which so it can go on the ground and not get too muddy for on the battlefield. And then
I have like a bandolier that I wear.
Has like a whole load of tools.
Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool.
But some of these tools are things like a pack of Poundland tweezers, or an upholstery needle, or so I've got a lovely sort of, it looks like a wickedly curved needle. Yeah. It's about the size of my thumb.
Yeah.
But that's what
it's perfect.
50p from a haberdashery or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's things like a pair of nail scissors or a hand mirror, or I have got a couple of like dentist style tools, and I think like there are shops on the Empire Field that will sell something like that for £1.
Yeah.
And you don't need the whole set or the whole roll. You can if you want, buy that kind of thing, but it's the sort of thing where you can build up one or two little props a bit at a time.
Yeah.
Until suddenly you realise that you've acquired a jar of leeches and several esoteric bits and bobs. And
it's often with props, it's the implication of the prop more than anything else. So, for example, the flash of the steel that you're about to draw, to draw your kind of LARP wound with, incision with, is that sells it, right? It doesn't need to be an actual medical grade implement or anything like that. Like, literally just having, I mean, you could almost just have like a strip of metal, right? I mean, if you're in intense RP, which often the physic experience is, you can actually sell it with minimal and cheap kit, as you say. And
I would say, not at bare minimum, because at bare minimum you can just do it with your hands.
Yeah.
But if you want something, then a sewing needle.
Yeah.
Just a simple sewing needle in a fold of fabric so you don't lose it is going to take you quite a long way. Perhaps pair that with a pair of nail scissors or something that could conceivably be a scalpel if you squint at it.
Yeah.
And you're good to go.
I mean, because you're going to kind of be waving it around in your hands, and it's going to be pinched in your hands in such a way, and you're going to be making the motions of a scalpel, where really all you'll actually see. I mean, you could almost do it with a fountain pen, to be honest with you, or something like that, sufficiently sort of gauged, right? It sells the idea, and that's the important thing. And I think I've kind of touched on this in a couple of other podcasts, and used a phrase that I like to use, which is the generosity of people with their RP. People are willing to go places with you often, and you can to go those places with them, where you can kind of have this kind of give and take of like cues, and this idea that people will. Sorry, Dave, but it's the idea that people will respond to something that you set up. So you say, "I'm going to make an incision now." And then that gives them the opportunity to, make the scream, and also to present you with problems. Like maybe it doesn't go swimmingly, right? And there's always the option to be like, oh no, something's gone wrong, perhaps. Like in a sense, you can actually play it off in different ways.
Maybe we should talk about what a good patient is, right? Like, and I think you're right in saying it's a two-way street, right? Like a physics there to heal players as a mechanic in the game, right? But they're also there for RP as well, right? So you just standing there mutely waiting for your timer to run out it's not great for anyone involved, like especially like I said before, when usually it's come off an intense action on the battlefield maybe, and you're tired. That's like, so I understand sometimes when you're a little low energy, but still like giving something back is always worthwhile for someone giving up their time to heal you, you know.
So I think one of the first meeting that you have with a patient, one of the best things that they can do is when you say, so what's wrong, is to give an instruction of, oh, I got hit in the head, or oh, got stabbed, or something like that, because an injury that would be blindingly obvious were it real life is obviously not blindingly obvious when you're just pretending it's happened. So the fact that someone's leg isn't working, or they have a massive wound to the head, or have been shot with an arrow, you obviously can't see those wounds. You can't assess, but you're trying to be a competent medic who can assess. So you need that kind of give and take, and that can be out of character. Oh, I got hit like this, and all this happened. Or it can be more in character, such as, oh, I didn't see it properly, but I got hit in the head, and then that lets you know that you've got a head wound to deal with. It also means that when they hand over the traumatic card, you know that's the bit you should be looking at and searching for them to give you the card.
Yeah.
Just those little clues, like, and to have you kind of respond to what you're doing is really good as well. So we've talked about kind of the countdown clues, or I'm going to make the incision now, and the describing what you're going to do. But any little bit of interaction that you get back from that is good. So it could be no, don't, or can you take the armor off, or can you make sure the scar's neat, or don't make it too neat, put something to show off about.
Yeah, go on, I want the biggest scar possible, please.
There's also there's that whole element of and you brought this up earlier, Dave. You guys carried me into the hospital once, and there's the idea of those hangers-on that are around, and you get that moment, which happens in real life, of course, where busy people around are actually kind of in the way, and it gives and they kicked you out, which is the right thing to do, right? And it's like, but everyone's obviously cares, right? Because there's an intense moment of our people, this person who
it was really
you
fun
care about could die,
because it was a really intense, like, no, we want to see if he's all right, and this woman's like just really direct with us about getting out and all this stuff, and it was just like even a few seconds of hesitation created like this drama that was like we weren't gonna wait. It was just fun to be like, oh well, I want to make sure he's all right, and just be that rowdy chaos within the scene,
But that's also fun as well, like to have to someone who's dealing with the hangers on. And again, that the way you deal with people who are hanging around, the friends and family, is also very different depending on whether it's a skirmish, you've only got one or two people in the tent, or whether you've got dozens. Like, if you've got dozens, you need the space. If you've only got one or two, then maybe you'll be a bit more generous and say, okay, we'll just wait over there, or you'll get them involved. If there aren't many physics around, you might be like, right, you're his mate, you hold him down and make sure he doesn't move while I do this, or you keep him awake, or you tell me what's happened. If you've got a physic who's coming in for the battlefield with a patient, even if that physic isn't going to be the one doing all the surgery, you might be like, right, well, you were on the field, you tell me what's happened, you give me their case, you give me their medical history, effectively.
And that's really cool, because you get that moment which is kind of almost like passing the notes on as a doctor. And a lot of these things, it can it's all obviously make believe, and you're kind of like you're rolling in a kind of a very free flow way, but you can kind of everyone's watched enough TV shows and has probably had a trip to the hospital maybe once or twice or whatever, and has been to a doctor's surgery, right? You can kind of guesstimate your way around, and it's surprisingly easy to do the hospital drama in a way which is actually really good fun for everybody, and everybody can just have a really good fun playing with the experience of doing all of the roles that are involved in that.
The different personalities. Imagine the different personalities in the hospital must be fascinating, right? The different approaches to medicine and how they interact with each other must be.
It's such a family as well, because people get to know each other, and you do feel that camaraderie of we're all healers, we're all getting stuck into this. This is our hospital. Even if and the same way that you have a family. The family don't always all get on. You always have your weirdnesses and quirks, and everyone just kind of rolls with it, which is really nice.
How does the leadership inside the hospital get arranged? Are they voted positions?
So we have a non-exec. We actually have 5 non-executive positions at the moment. So we've got the bursar, so that's myself. We've got the chancellor, and we've got the librarian. And none of those three are the original three. The original three have either retired or died on the battlefield. Okay. So that's 3 new people. Although myself and the librarian have been around since the start. And then we've got a couple of other kind of financial positions who deal with like sodalities and triage as well, I think. Is it sodalities? No, it's the other one. The one that's ministries, that's it, I think.
Okay.
But those positions try not to make decisions about what the hospital does in character. Like Bursar is responsible for looking after the money and buying the herbs, but takes instruction from what we call the board. The chancellor is like the head of the hospital, but again, isn't a voting member of the board. The librarian looks after organising the memorandum between sessions or organising lectures, but doesn't have a vote on the board. And that's to give us the kind of the outer character position within the hospital that lets us actually do the outer character running, like storing all the stuff, keeping the lights running, putting up the tent and organising the tent being put up and taken down, looking after the set dressing, providing like
it's
a
full
kettle
on, right?
and
It's a
things.
It's a big operation, right?
Yeah. And so it's not a reward per se, but it is kind of a bit of a reason why we do it.
You'd have like a logistical understanding of just simply what it is to keep the structure and the mechanics of it all running. So I think it actually makes sense, just purely on that sort of level as well.
But then we have a board which is a member from each nation, and basically each nation can choose how they select someone to be a board rep. Like it was always part of the hospital ethos that it should be kind of open to anyone who wants to be a member, wants to take part, wants to get involved. It should be a fairly, I want to say, egalitarian style of organisation. Yeah. So each nation decides how its rep is elected. And sometimes that's as informal as one person wants the job and goes around all the other physics in their nation as far as they can find them and goes, I want this. Does anybody object? Certainly at the start, I kind of got roped into being the league rep. So I'm in the league. And I was the first league rep. And that was because I was in the right place at the right time when the first meeting was going and I was keen. And after that, I went around and made sure no one objected. And then someone else took over a couple of years later when I became bursar. But I think in Wintermark, there's a far more kind of formal election. Dawn have their own way of doing it, like their own kind of challenge system that they've kind of adopted.
Sounds exhausting being in Dawn, right? Everything's got to have challenges and things to over. It's like, oh my god.
Oh, but it can be all sorts of challenges. It doesn't have to be a physical one.
No, I'm only jesting. Please don't hate me, Dawn.
Each, basically, the exec or the non-exec don't really mind how the executives get chosen. How those 10 people get chosen, we don't mind. Then it should be down to them to make the decisions as to what the hospital is going to do in the long term. And any big changes that are made. So quite often, the way it goes is that we'll quite often come up with ideas, but we don't just act on any ideas that we do. We have to kind of present them to the board, and the board will come up with their own ideas and say, well, we think this would be a cool thing to do. Does someone want to go and do it? Or we've been approached with this opportunity. What do people think?
Yeah.
So that's how we kind of, it's an interesting line to tread, because as you say, it's such a big institution and people don't really realise necessarily initially that it's player run.
Yeah.
That we do want to kind of tread that line of being fairly fair and open as much as we can, and to give people the opportunity to do things.
No, I think it works really well, and I think like there's the way that different nations think about, or different individuals think about healing. You know, for example, should a healer be paid for their service? Yes. For example, it's a really like, and there are no wrong answers to any of these things, and I think that's the wonderful thing about the Physic game, is that, you know, I mean, I basically just give everything away for free pretty much all the time when I'm a Physic, but other people would look at that and say, well, daft. What you're actually doing is then, in the long term, limiting the number of people you can heal in the future because you won't have the resources to do so. And there's so many different approaches. And I think that the hospital's always seemed very welcoming to all of that.
So it's a really fascinating area, and I think it's one, because we've got people from all the nations, it's one that we get like nice discussions about quite frequently. So Brass Coast, for example, where everything is paid for, everything has a price, everything should be paid for. We actually, I think, have a specific contract with the Brass Coast, like with their egregore, that takes account for the fact that physics seem to be working for free at the hospital.
Right.
Whereas there is a contract that basically covers them working at the hospital if that's what they want to do, without being paid in coin, so to speak. I mean, I think a lot of people look at the prosperity argument of, well, there are soldiers out there paying with their blood.
Yeah.
So, they've paid, just not in coin. It's the prosperous thing to do. And so there is kind of like a formalised contract agreeing that.
There's so many
come up and work at the hospital.
I love that. I love that.
And that's just the way that we've done it.
Whoever first came up with that, sitting around a campfire, listening to the debate, and just went, the soldiers already paid for it with their blood, and then they said it out loud, and then the whole group went, wow, that's good. That's really good. They paid for it in blood. That's proper game stuff as well. Like it's virtuous. That's hard to argue against. Absolutely fantastic way to make a point.
But I mean, there's lots of ways of interpreting prosperity, which is really interesting.
And the virtues are phenomenal.
The whole way is constantly a whatever you want it to be. Like I could, even now with my limited understanding, like I would love to get into a throwdown with a priest on just the smallest nickety point and just argue the opposite of the fact the whole way through on what seemingly could be an innocuous point. I mean, Jesus, terrifying. Sorry,
my
Ellie.
friend, you should talk to someone in the synod next.
Sorry, you were going to say, Ellie. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about so members of the hospital. Being a member of the hospital is not a prerequisite to working at the hospital. So if what you want to do is to rock up and stand next to a bench and do the whole being mentored by someone or getting to know the rest of the crew or helping out with skirmishes and everything like that, we don't ask for anything for that. Nothing at all. Like you could just rock up for free and start helping out at the hospital. That's fine. What the membership gives you is access to like additional perks that come out sort of peripheral to the main healing game. So it's things like access to our herb swap, our herb bank. So the hospital tries to maintain quite a generous herb stash, which we hand out to physics at the start of every battle. So we try and provide like a stack of herbs to every nation at the start going out. So it's never going to provide enough for everyone, but it means that hopefully no one has nothing.
Yeah. It's really good.
And herbs are a lot more useful out in the field than they are in the hospital. I mean, the hospital still needs some, but it doesn't need as much as we tend to accumulate. So we try and give them out. But what that means is if you're an alchemist or if you're needing specific herbs for specific things, if you're a member of the hospital, you can come to me as Bursa and say, I've got 2 rose wheels and I need a vervain and a maz. Yeah. Which are 2 of the herbs. Can I swap 1 for 1? And if you're a member of the hospital, then we'll just say, yes, that's fine. As long as we're not desperately short on anything.
Sure. Yeah.
Then we'll just do the swaps. It also gives you access to things like free access to our lectures and things like that, and reduced prices, I think, on our memorandum, and like small little things that make you feel part of a group rather than being core to the healing game. So we don't try and cut anyone out of the healing game by virtue of not having any membership.
It expands the healing game, if anything else, because it gives that idea of not scholarships, maybe the wrong term, but this idea of.
Well, I think scholarship is entirely the right term, because if you look at the Anvil Hospital, we're not just the Anvil Hospital; we're the Anvil Hospital and Imperial School of Medicine.
Yeah, that's true. But
so there is a very kind of idea that medicine is something that you have to learn, you have to work at it. That there are scholarly discussions to be had, that there's knowledge to be shared. I think that's the aspect that we tend to tie into our membership more than the healing aspect, which is something that we want everyone to be able to just have a go at.
Being able to go to the hospital and donate one of my books was really fun. I'd put together this kind of herbalist kind of thing, and I have no idea what actually happened to it. I just kind of walked in, and I was really nervous about my RP actually, because it's super embarrassing, kind of walking in, kind of giving, oh, hi, I've made this book. It's all about all the herbs and stuff. But like, I handed it over, and I given one to the library and one to the hospital, basically. And
I bet our librarians got it.
Yeah, I have no idea, but it's The Alchemist of Ease by Talis Ashbourne. But
stop promoting it, Ian. It's embarrassing.
Hey, it is embarrassing,
this is
actually.
An ad-free podcast, Ian. You're out here shilling your book constantly.
I'm shilling my wares. But my point is that it's actually like it was super cool in a sense, because it felt important to my character at the time, right? That of course a copy should go to the hospital. You know, like giving one to the library is one thing, but actually almost the more important place to go and present it was the hospital, because it was one of the first places I went as a character, one of the first places to welcome me in as a player, as a LARPer, really, and sort of give me any RP experience, and to be able to say, oh, you know, this is something that I've kind of clubbed together and sort of built over time, and my character is now an alchemist and has more experience, and often I think maybe people get the wrong impression. I think maybe I'm way better than I am, which I'm not. But like, what I mean is, it's like for me, for Talis, he's kind of like, you know, he feels like he's kind of reached that point. And I play him like he has, and so it's cool to sort of be able to turn up and say, oh, here's this thing I put together. You know, it's really cool. It was a really cool moment for me, and I think the hospital has that in spades. That it is this kind of hub of, it, as you say, like scholarly kind of medicine.
I think one of the really interesting things is when we start gathering like memorandum articles or papers people have written, or get lectures done. So people write papers on like in-character events. So if the Valorn are becoming more of a problem, then people will get like Navari who write papers on how do you treat Valorn, how do you avoid getting infected by Valorn, how do you treat green lung, you know, and that will be based off in-character knowledge and things they've picked up in play. Or, you know, we'll have, I think we've got a paper on the new Druge Great Poisons that have come out. Yeah. So when they came out, they were terrifyingly scary, and they still are to an extent. Yeah. They're lethal, and we didn't at the time have any cures.
So what are they? Like, what sort of things?
So have you heard of the Great Poisons, which are the ones that they're about 15 herbs to make, so they're ridiculously expensive.
No, I haven't heard about the Great Poisons. Jesus Christ.
They last for about 15 minutes. So once you've made them, they have 15 minutes of activity.
Okay.
And in that time, you have to get someone to drink them. So like trick them into drinking it, or force it, or whatever. But they are poisons that will kill you within half an hour.
Yeah.
And there are cures, and the cures themselves take about 10 herbs. And you have to know how to make them.
Yeah.
In order to make the cures. And again, the cure has to be administered within half an hour of you taking the poison, otherwise your character will die.
And all of this is fairly recent knowledge, and so
there are imperial poisons, and they've been in there from game start. Now there are Druge versions of them. I'm not going to give away any details because A, I can't remember them, and B, I don't.
No, you don't want to. This is information you don't want to like make very publicly available. This is definitely not like as liberal as I am. We should suppress this immediately. People should.
Well, it was interesting. This is an interesting point, because when I was putting my book together, I had to sort of think, oh, would Talis actually, you know, because I kind of was playing it like I was walking around talking to different people and getting their opinions, and it was the whole thing's kind of sort of slightly written on, like, oh, you know, I heard this from so and so, and this is like their kind of what I've managed to piece together. But like the idea, I've got a little bit about the poisons, about whether or not, you know, my kind of justification for including them in the book, and it's kind of like it is an interesting thing. Like, is this knowledge that should exist? Like, and it's kind of like people need to know so they know what to look out for and how to potentially heal it. And then, of course, the other interesting thing is, and this is very good game design, I think, the cures for these things are in the same tree as the poisons themselves. Yeah. So you have to know how to make the poison to know how to heal the poison. So both the people most likely to poison you are the same people who are likely to heal you potentially. That's a really
it's an interesting point that we were at the very start of the game. We, you know, the militia were like, well, we want a list of people who make the poisons, and we're thinking, well, actually, no, because there's quite a lot of people who do make the poisons because they've learned how to make them because they want to know how to make the cures.
Yes.
And
that's
and we don't want to give the militia anyone who's going to put their name on that list is probably not someone who's going to do the poisoning.
If someone gets murdered, then you're on the list and you're immediately a suspect. Like,
even though, like, probably the people who are going to make the poisons are not going to be the people who are going to set up such things.
Fantastic.
So that was kind of a bit of pushback there. We have a big book of medicine that we publish. I think we're on our 3rd edition now as rules are updated and things. And it's basically all the rules in a nice in-character format for all the potions, all the traumatic wounds, everything we've got, we've kind of put it in there. But on that, although the poisons are in there, the recipes are not. So we'll be like, there's this poison, these are the symptoms, this is what you've got to look out for, here is the cure, and here's how you make the cure. Here's a list of all the ingredients you need, but we don't list the ingredients of the poisons.
I did see, and that would have been a smarter way of doing it. But there you go.
Ian, I love it. Ian, it's brilliant.
I've got to look for that now.
There is something to be said for, if you see someone, with all these herbs, is that a suspicious thing if they've suddenly got them all in a packet or looking to do things? It's an interesting thing.
Well, I know someone with loads of herbs. He keeps them in a big stash. He does.
I mean, to be fair, my stash is it's not a surefire way of doing it.
It started off so feel good and like love for physics and people, but now I'm like, no, you should fear them. You should definitely fear them.
I mean, I think that's the cool thing is, and this is true, of course, of many other aspects of the game, is that there's so many different counterpoints and different ways of taking the healer game, the alchemist game, all these different things, and you can play it off and justify your decisions in different ways, and none of those decisions are wrong, right? The idea that, as you say, to learn how to heal the poisons, you have to know how to essentially the same way of learning how to make the poisons. And should you be on a list? That's an interesting question. Should you be on a list? And the idea that as a conversation exists in the game, right? The idea that isn't something that is like a banned conversation, right? The idea that this is actually something like, maybe it's interesting if we were on a list because we knew how to make poisons, right? That would be an interesting part of the game. I'm pleased we're not, but like, say if that was a thing, it's kind of cool.
Well,
it's super cool.
It's a question of oversight, right? Like, as boring as this conversation probably sounds to some people, but like, these are like really interesting questions about like the hospital is an institution, right? Like it's recognized as it's a thing, right? Like it's beyond an idea. It now exists in people's minds, right? So,
but importantly, it doesn't really have any authority over anybody. So we have no authority over what a physic does. Like, we are not in charge of physics. We are a group of physics who have a hierarchy.
Yeah.
In that we have people who help direct what the hospital is going to do. We have people who help make decisions about what the hospital does. But there is no law whatsoever in imperial law that says, and other physics must abide by the hospital's decisions.
Yeah.
So we can say as much as we like, there should be a list or there shouldn't be a list. And people may listen to us because they respect us, but they don't have to do anything we say.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the really interesting things about us being like a player-led thing, is it's not like the Synod or the Senate, where if the chair of the Senate says, you're out of order, get out. That's a civil servant telling you something. That's a game rules thing. Even if it's got like an in-character hat, there are, mechanics behind that, which are the game's laws, effectively, or the in-character laws. Yes, you can break in-character laws, but then there might be in-character consequences.
Exactly.
The hospital doesn't have that authority because it's not, although it's an imperial institution, it's not one with like civil service backing.
Even as a patient, you are under no obligation to get treated at the hospital, right?
Oh goodness, no. I think we try and remind people.
I'm making a terribly capitalist argument there, but you don't have to pay for it for one. But you should go there because it's the only option. But effectively, you can do everything the hospital does in your own group. Effectively, right? Like, so it's not like you're under any obligation. And people do just decide that I'm going to go to my home physic, or my physic's taking me back to my camp, and they're going to treat me there. And we have to sometimes remind
people who are new to the hospital, and to be fair, remind ourselves who've been there for years. If people want to walk on past, that's their prerogative. You can't stop them, and you shouldn't stop them. If they want to just walk on, you can make a bit of role playing out of it. You can say, "Oh no, like you're injured, you should come in."
Yeah.
If they really want to go back and get treated somewhere else,
I've seen people walk away with
they should
green
do that.
lung, having been warned, and
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
made very clear with the card that something bad is going to happen to you. Yeah.
Yeah. And
But I mean, maybe they have got a physic in their camp who's ready and waiting.
Yeah. And it's opportunity to have and being the physic of our kind of group, it's that there is that whole game that you can engage with. The idea that you can be sitting around your campfire and somebody can come up to you and say, "Oh, there's this injury that I have." I mean, we had a situation at the beginning of, was it last event or the event before? It doesn't really matter, but everybody turned up and a certain proportion of people were injured because they'd been in a battle and they were carrying these kind of wounds from this previous thing. I'm sure they could have gone to the hospital, but I'm the striding's physic, right? It's I would heal them, right? It makes sense.
Yeah. Also,
So-
I think
And I
there's
see that with like members of my family as well. If they've, because of the way they role play, quite often they will hide it, and they will say, "Well, no, I'm not seriously injured, so I'm just going to not clog up the hospital. I'm going to go back to my camp, or I need to get this armor off or whatever." So I'm not the only physic in the family either. So the physics in my family do tend to track down members of our family after the battle, just to make sure that there's no lingering wounds. And that's quite an interesting bit of RP as well. And sometimes it's because they're being all gruff about it and they're like, "No, I'm fine, I'm fine." It's like, "Are you really fine?" Poke.
Yeah.
Oh no, look, you weren't. But sometimes it's because the effect on their card is one that isn't instantly noticeable. So I've got a friend who who had a wonderful thing where her character had a perforated gut, and that's something that wouldn't show up until like an hour or so later. So she just didn't tell anybody until an hour or two later when she had a drink, and then sort of fell over screaming. And it's having the not the patience isn't quite the right word, but it's a lovely way of approaching the more subtle traumatic wounds. Is to clock. Actually, no, this wouldn't be obvious. I'm going to sit on this.
Yeah.
And role play it. See if
I'm too excitable for that. I'd probably just be like, "Oh my god, I've got a traumatic wound. Let me." Woohoo!
Oh yeah, and that's fine too, because they can present in lots of ways. But you do get people who do this and get back to their camps and then don't go up to the hospital, and that's really cool too. Like there is plenty to go round in terms of our.
And everything, and as this is of course expands out to all that, but there's so many choices that you can make as a player. I heard, I don't know if this is true, that somebody was injured and was taking minutes or something at the Senate or something like this, and didn't get treated, and essentially died at the Senate because they were too stoic to actually say that they had been injured, and they were sort of taking minutes for some higher up person and just literally keeled over and died. And it's just like the idea that would be like, but that's a choice, right? As a player, that's a choice, and a completely legitimate and really interesting one, right? I mean, the fact I'm talking about it as an idea, as a prospect, that you could choose not to get healed. If maybe you for some whatever the reason is, your loyalty, whatever that thing is, you're like, no, it's very important that I sit here and I take the minutes and I continue doing my duty without
complaint. It could be under an anointing or some kind of magical effect that makes you ignore that kind of physical thing. I mean, I did have there were situations where you're like looking for differences in behaviour, like various curses or magical traumatic wounds.
Must be an interesting one.
Oh yeah, I mean, because sometimes they can be healed physically, and sometimes you're like, I know there's something wrong with you. I know that you're seeing dead people in the corners of your eyes, so I know that's not right. And you've just called me by my dead cousin's name, so you need to sit down. And sometimes you can look at it and go, okay, this is something I can actually fix with a herb or something like that. And sometimes you're like, no, I need an exorcist. At which point you have to hope that someone can track down an exorcist for you. And so you do find that people are members of the hospital who aren't physics at all.
Yeah,
I was not even to say healers, but are exorcists or mages who can do specific rituals that are very useful for other aspects.
We've got to find an exorcist to have on an episode. Oh my god.
Yeah, I know some people actually, but we'll.
You know some people.
I know some people. I'll check, but
how do you know people? Like I don't know anyone. We've been going for exactly the same amount of events. I should know people. I don't know one
Anyway.
exorcist.
But it like how does I mean, are there kind of crossover things as well where it's you're both injured in need of a physic and you're cursed and
Oh,
you kind
goodness,
of need
yes.
to be tended by both simultaneously? I mean, because
So
that's really
usually that will then be down to triage, where you
Hmm.
work out which one's the more lethal one, and you stabilize whichever one you can first.
Sure.
I mean, it's also really interesting when you go into battles, or you have people going into battles where you know that there are going to be certain curses coming at you,
the black
and so you
plateau or
have
something like that.
Yeah. So you have the exorcists ready and waiting in advance.
Yeah.
There was one.
Oh my
It was
god,
2 years ago.
I love it so
I think
much.
it was the Black Plateau, where
it's crazy.
we knew that lots of people were going to be coming back needing a specific curse removal.
Yeah.
And there weren't a huge number of people who could do this, and it cost like 4 mana to do it.
Yeah.
And we were fairly sure about half the battlefield were going to be coming back with this. Like, it was going to be big. And we worked out. Well, I say we. It wasn't me. It was cleverer people than me. Worked out. Actually, there's a different spell you can do that lets you bounce a spell from one person to another, and that only costs 2 mana.
I did.
But there were
this.
fewer people who.
I've done this too. Yeah.
We did this exact
this.
thing. Yeah, sorry, Ellie.
Yeah.
So we had everybody come back to the battlefield, and we had some people who could do the initial, we're going to cure you of this thing, and then we'd keep the person there while the next person did the whole, right, and now I'm going to use 2 mana to bounce this onto the next person to cure them. Now that you're cured, you can go. Now you're going to stay here until you're cured, and we're going to bounce it onto the next person.
It was.
I had an amazing dramaturgist do this.
Awesome, wasn't it? I had a really, had a really good guy who was like he had a queue that was like, it was so long, but he brought that heat, and it was just like I walked in there and was just like giving, like, just really going for it. And then when he pinged me with the thing, I was like, oh, what's going? And I carried on going, like, RPing, like, the whole confused about what's going on, having just been cured of this curse. And then pinged out, and he just said, all right, mate, off you go. And I'm like, oh, all right then. And then I left the room. It was brilliant. Yeah, really fun.
And then although you've maybe only got, like, it was a small handful of people who could do this. So everyone else is going, right, well, we've dealt with all the injured people, but we've still got all these cursed people. And they're all playing up, or they're all angry, or they're all sad, or we're gonna have to look after them.
Yeah, it's a lot, right?
And keep them in order and deal with all the management of, like, just people.
Yeah.
While these amazing mages just bounce these things onto the other people. Oh my gosh, they were exhausted at the end because they'd been basically been drinking and doing rituals non-stop for half an hour, 45 minutes, trying to cure everybody. It worked, and they did it, but oh my god, it's amazing.
Yeah, that's cool.
In terms of organisation with the hospital, your links with other groups, like, say, the Exorcists, or like,
how do you know
mages? How
also,
do you know?
How do you know that shit's gonna go south? Basically, like, I love that vision of, like, all the troops, like, getting ready to go to battle, really confident, while just behind the tent is a whole bunch of, like, physics and, like, new people there, specialists in whatever horrible things. I mean, like, it's a cool scene, right? Like, how do
it all kind of plays into, I mean, what we have to do is we have to work with the generals, and we have to work with military scouts and things like that. And so when the generals are working out which battles they're going to go for, what opportunities they're going to go for, they also have the opportunity to, you know, scry on the area or get more information about the area. The Imperial Exorcist or Imperial Mages, or the like the Grand Masters of the various orders, might well be able to do things or have access to information that might tell them what's going to go on or what kinds of creatures they're going to be seeing on the battlefield. It might be the case of, they're going against Jotun. Jotun are really heavy hitters, but they don't tend to curse people and they don't tend to use poisons.
Yeah.
So we're going to be expecting lots of traumatics. Or it might be, we're going against the Druge. All right, we need to send people out with Blade Root because we know there's going to be lots of poisons.
Yeah.
Or Thule, okay, magical curses. So you kind of start learning your enemy, and you start scrying and going, well, okay, this is on the Black Plateau, so we know that this is going to happen, and we know this is how we can protect troops, but we might not be able to protect everybody in time. Because trying to get the message out that everyone needs a particular anointing before you go on might not happen from, like, the Friday night to the Saturday morning.
I think that's a really... We've had quite a few where we've had to, there have been skirmishes, and you start to see that the complexities of getting the information chain to the group of people who are turning up for the skirmish, for example, that they need to be anointed, and the idea that that's something that has a process involved, and you need to have the people there, and you know, do you have the mana, or do you have the money, or whatever it is, to pay for these various things? And it's a challenge. There's a logistical challenge to all of this. And
someone started taking notes up at the hospital. Actually, we talked to the war scout who's based themselves up there, but we also talked to like people who are queuing up to go out skirmishes. Go, where are you going? Who are you fighting? How many people are going, and how long's your window?
Yeah,
because we want to know what we're expecting back.
When you first start, like when we first started, we were like little lemmings, weren't we? We'll just sign up for any scope. We don't. What do you mean? Like, I don't know why are we here? Like, you were saying that as you're going through the gate, right? Which is just such a wonderful. I love that. Like when you're new to Anvil and just all of that, right? But and then finding out it's something truly awful the other side, right? Like amazing. But yeah, I think nowadays I'm a lot more savvy on, like, if you're telling me it's 10 o'clock and you're gonna go out there and there's some wraiths out there, I'm like, I'm good. I'm gonna go and hit the bar.
Stay here.
Yeah. You guys have a great time. I might see you if you come back. So you know.
So I think that's an interesting thing that we do. So we've started recently being just so fed up of people not knowing where they're going that we're like, okay, well, we're going to find the information out from some people, and hopefully you'll find out where you're going. It's not our responsibility, but we want to be prepared when you come back. And the timing is a really interesting one, because obviously there's slots when the gate is open or can be opened for people to go through on various quests, you know, skirmishes, battles. But then there's a closing time as well. And if the gate closes while you're on the other side, it's not that you'll get stuck necessarily, but the gate is kind of misaligned, I like to think of it as. I mean, I have no idea if that's like how it works, but you can get magical shock. So you can get magical traumatic injuries through coming through a gate that's already closed or is closing. Which means that if we know that a skirmish is meant to be out for half an hour, at the half-hour mark, we'll be looking at our watches and going, they're not back yet. Hopefully they're not all dead, but we might be dealing with some magical traumatics. And there was one amazing incident. I think it was with some Wintermark and some Navari, maybe some Varishkans as well. Must have been an 80-person skirmish. Absolutely massive. They had about 40 minutes. They all went out, and we got to like the 40-minute mark, and they weren't back, and they weren't back, and they weren't back. And then they came through, and they all came through, and they all came through with gate shock, which meant that every single one had some kind of traumatic injury.
That's amazing.
That was related to kind of magical traumatic injury. Some of them were quite simple to cure. It was things like, I say simple, like they weren't time dependent, and all they needed was 5 different denomination coins pressed at various points on their skin, which is reasonably simple.
Hilarious.
But it's not timed. Right? Or it's things like you need a green iron needle. And you're like, has anyone got green iron? We're going to have to go and get green iron. Or it's things like 5 people have had their souls kind of shifted around and merged. So to cure them, and this one had a time limit, you had to find everyone who had this card out of the 80 people, get them all together, link them all together with like chains and needles, and then kind of shift their souls back.
It's so
and if you
didn't I love that.
I don't want to be a part of this. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. It's
bravo,
so good,
bravo! And, that is amazing.
It was amazing to roll, and because that was a skirmish, an evening skirmish, our the hospital was not as fully manned as it would have been, because we weren't expecting 80 people with gate shock, because we weren't expecting them all to be late. So we had a handful of people, and people came running when we started calling for help.
Yeah.
Being on duty at that time, just having all these people come through, it was an incredible experience. One of the best things that was an amazing experience in and of itself, but we had a chap and his 2 daughters up helping out at the time.
Yeah.
And so there are these kids who at the time must have been, 8 or 9? And suddenly there were all these patients around, and they did such an amazing job of getting stuck in and helping out. And then like they were assisting their dad, and they were assisting me, and they were kind of helping out. And every now and then there'd be like an unusual thing that was needed, and so we'd have to pass the equipment around to whoever needed it, and they'd be ferrying stuff around. It was so
That's
good.
a really interesting topic, actually. Do you have a lot of interaction or any interaction with the Academy? And just so people know, the Academy is essentially like I don't really know how to explain it. I'm going to explain it badly. It's kind of like where kids would go essentially to kind of sort of learn the ropes of Empire, if you like, or just engage in some kind of fun activities.
Provides kind of kid level engagement with the world while it's still being proper engagement with the world.
Yeah. Does the hospital do much there, or do you have much interaction with that?
Bits and bobs, not a huge amount, like nothing formal in every time, but like if kids want to come up and help out, like that's fine.
Because I've had people come up to me and ask, who are graduating, kind of approach me about learning how to brew potions and stuff like that, just as an alchemist. So if that's part of their kind of graduation, is to kind of learn how to brew a potion. So there's a lot of opportunities. Like it's fun, right? Like how the game is kind of designed in different ways, and how it's really interesting the way that Empire in general is kind of laid out. It's super cool.
There seems to be this common like even talking to the guys last time about the military stuff and talking to you about the medical game, like it's all these facets are still interacting with the same game world, right? Like they're not set, they're all affected by the same things. So it's kind of interesting to see these ripple effects of the game decision making rippling through to all these different institutions and people and groups, and how they all react, and how that's potentially going to kick back to even like everything to do with what you're doing at Empire, even if you don't even know what's going on, right? It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I mean the level of complexity in the game is phenomenal.
Yes.
And I'm very glad that I only deal with one corner of it. But it's great because if you need to know about the military game, you go, Tim, tell me about the military game.
Yeah.
For example.
I think that's a really exciting thing, though, right? Like you can kind of, you can dip your toe in all these different areas, and there's, expressions of the game, like the hospital that exists, that are just born of player activity and a generosity of spirit to make things work and to make the experience as good as possible. I mean, that's what we all want. We want the experience to be as good as possible, and to have those moments when the hospital explodes with patients, and as you say, you have that situation which is completely unexpected, and this is what things look like when a hospital or an emergency service is unexpectedly overwhelmed, and you can have that moment. And to go back to what I said at the beginning, it's like the physic game, you can be a big damn hero, like doing something, and as you said, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go on the battlefield or you have to do all those cliche things. You can do something which is super awesome RP, super like engaging and rewarding, and all the ways, all the notes you want to hit. And the physic game is just such an easy into it, from my experience, and I found it hugely rewarding.
I really love it. I love it. It's a really good adaptable game as well. So also, like, my game style has changed over the last few years. So I genned up as a battlefield medic and like went on the battlefield every time until I got pregnant with my daughter. Which obviously meant that I wasn't going on the battlefield anymore, and I haven't really been on the battlefield since. So I've taken her along to games, but she's just been too young to leave with anyone, and my other half, so her dad doesn't come to Empire, so I take her along, and so that puts me very much on a very anvil-based game. And so I now have to do the thing of watching my family and my group go off through the gate and kind of waving them goodbye and hoping that they come back alive, which is a very different experience, but equally fun.
Totally. And I think that's the really interesting thing, is that all of these different doors of RP open, and I never, like, the idea that when you turn up, I mean, super excited about going on battles and skirmishes and stuff, but then you'll get your teeth into a part of the game that will suddenly make you say, oh, maybe I won't go on that skirmish, and I won't go on that situation because, I'd rather do this. I'd rather pursue this ambition in the game, and or a situation occurs, maybe as you say, like you've got real life situations that require you to shift your game. But trust me, the game is there to enjoy in so many different ways that you're not going to miss out, and because you can find things.
Because even the drama of like people pouring in from the battlefield and being really intense, I can't even engage in that quite as much at the moment, because if I've got, at the time it was what, two-year-old with me, she gets scared. So I've got her, I'm carrying her, so I can't get stuck into the same kind of medical stuff. But the hospital is such a welcoming environment that I still feel like my character has a place and a purpose and friends and a reason to be there. So even if during the battle I'm standing away back from the tent, watching what's going on, afterwards I can go up, I can talk to people, and I still feel like my character can take part in the world and has a place, which is incredibly valuable to me as a role player, to not lose that.
Yeah, totally.
If that makes sense. And it's a really good environment to do that in.
There are these kind of vistas to LARP that I kind of touch on quite a lot, but this idea that you can observe and then engage at kind of in different ways with the environment that sort of emerges around you. You don't have to be full on with every single sort of encounter that you have, but you can kind of you can really enjoy just the experience of being there and not miss out in there's lots of ways you can reward yourself.
All of this is about perspective, which is why there's this, like, why Empire is so epic, right? Like, if I were gonna film Empire the movie or whatever, like, I would have a camera in the hospital 100%, right? Like, all the goings on, and there could be innocuous things that happen earlier on that lead to events happening, the calm to the chaos. Like, it's pure drama. It's absolutely magical, right?
Dude, like, I mean, like,
we have hospital story time. So have you gone to hospital story time?
No, I haven't. That sounds incredible. What even is this?
Hospital story time with Tiberius. Yes. So basically, I haven't been able to go for a while either because small. But if you go up to hospital later on in the evening, so kind of from 10ish onwards. So as the last skirmishes are going out, it's a lot quieter. You've maybe just got one or two skirmishes out. And once we're reasonably sure that all the skirmishes have gone out for the day, people will pull up a bench, their drink of choice, and we'll start telling stories about the history of the hospital, or the best cases we've seen all day, or what's going on in the world, or we'll just the older and medics will tell stories of, back in my day, and it's I remember event 1 or event 3 or whatever from first year. And we'll tell the stories, and then people will start telling their own stories. And it's a great way of just getting that sense of community, because there's no one coming back through the gate. Yeah. You're not pretty not going to get any patients, but you're just doctors having a beer or equivalent.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of these things do. Yeah, a lot of these things do actually feed back into very real world comparatives. There are those moments when you're off duty. Or when somebody who was an old hand and experienced comes back in, everyone's it's Dr. So-and-so, right? These are real world things that exist. The idea of, a retired specialist coming back, or there's this person, they're like the authority on this thing, and they kind of are in town kind of thing. Like, there's all of this stuff exists in the real world and can be explored inside the kind of the breadth of Empire. It's super cool.
It's the Russian dolls.
It's also really nice. You get lots of.
Sorry, go on, Ellie.
Yeah, you get lots of like intonation gossip as well. So, for example, because we're all from different nations, if like something's happened in the League, I'll be able to say, well, this is what's happened. Or if something's happening in Wintermark or Varushka or wherever, you'll get medics from there saying, by the way, be aware of this. So there was a time when I think orcs were being particularly spiky due to the voices of their ancestors being a bit loud.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where the orcish members of the hospital were able to say, look, we're going to deal with the orcs because otherwise they're going to get a bit violent if you try and deal with them. So just be warned, this is what's happening, we're going to deal with it. But it can also be more subtle things like, have you heard the gossip about so-and-so, or have you seen what the Empress is wearing, or have you seen the Looking Glass lately?
We could do an entire episode on. I would love to get like someone that was good at understanding the scientific nature of rumors and at something like that, how messages get spread and how information gets spread around things and how it changes among the different people telling it and perception of things. Like Empire's, like, because we're so used to having phones and constantly in contact with things, it's interesting to hear word of mouth. Like, we regularly get to the end of, we usually do a few episodes of each day that we spent at an event type thing, and we'll say like, oh, we heard this and this was a thing. And what we don't mind about that so much is like, because we worry about, is it going to affect game too much? Usually the stuff we've heard is completely wrong, right?
Yes.
Or
even
we
the stuff we've
misunderstood it.
seen. Like, that's the other thing. Like, the memory is a funny thing, and even the stuff that you've experienced. If you've been in an intense battle, you can drastically inflate the size of your enemy, and not from a sense of like trying to make yourself sound better, just simply because adrenaline was pumping and you really did see 5 massive things coming towards you or whatever.
I think we said we saw 3. And I think there was only one. I think there was only one at the thing, but we swore that there were 2. Like, even now talking about it, I'm like,
I can see 2.
But there were 2 though. Like, having been told by people who were actually like part of the crew for it, no, there were definitely 2. No, there was 1. Some people were saying 3, which made it like, and we ran like school children. You know what I mean? Away from that, like, and it was amazing. Guys, I think we better. I think we better start drawing to a close because I salute
this has
you.
Been an absolute pleasure, by the way.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Really good talking to you guys.
I've been wanting to froth about the hospital and about the physic game and the healing game for ages, just because it really was like one of my first loves of LARP. Like, just and it's strange in a sense the way it's dropped off a little bit. I know I'm rambling again, but it's just to kind of have a point to actually come back to it and to be able to talk to you, Ellie, and just be like, it's really good. It's like, as I say, I hope you really get it, guys. Like, if you're a new character and you don't know what you're going to do, I can assure you, you're going to have a great time if you choose the healer game, because there's so many different avenues and there's so much fun, and the hospital is top tier.
The other thing to remember is, if you're a new player, of course, you don't have to spend your XP all at once.
Yeah.
So if you want, don't spend your XP. Come up to the hospital. We'll get you stuck in doing some stuff, because you're allowed to help with the role playing even if you don't have the skill. You can't do it by yourself, but you can always help. See if you like it. If you like it, then you'll have the XP that you can just buy into it. If you don't like it, you've not wasted your XP.
There is
if it's your very first time, exactly. If you've not spent any of your XP, you've got this apprentice skill. That's what the kids have to start with, but it's also what you have if you don't spend your XP to start with.
Yeah.
And it means that you can do anything as long as there's someone helping you do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool idea, and that is a really good idea. Like, not to be kind of, and also at the end of your first event, if you have spent your XP, you get the opportunity to do redos to a certain extent.
Yeah, and I think you can go and like spend your XP halfway through a game as well. Like,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you can.
I'm not sure about that.
No, you can. You can just rock up to God and pretty much anything's
say,
possible.
I want to spend this XP that I've accumulated or haven't used yet. I think you can just do that.
You can.
God could use it.
You can also have it reversed. So if it's your first event and you decide to be a character, and then you go and do that thing, you don't like it, go to God and they'll pull it back. In fact,
I'm pretty sure they do that. Yeah.
Talking to God is talking to God is very
Game
worthwhile. If you approach God in the right way, he can be very can be very bountiful, right? So it's I would say I've heard conversations when I've been in God, just doing whatever I'm doing, that have been like just really sweet. They're very human beings, right? So as long as you're going in with the good intentions of you want to try something out, then it's not bad. Anyway, now I'm rambling. Ellie, thank you so much for being here. Like, we've both really enjoyed this, right, Ian? Well, Ian,
amazing.
Yeah.
So
I've got to say, I've hardly even touched on like some of the operations of the hospital in terms of like how we run it and how we get money and all that kind of stuff.
I got really carried away talking about the awesomeness of stuff.
Because there's simply more from just hospital.
But I would say what's exciting is,
in the field.
Like, we're in danger of sometimes on the podcast, like, letting people know too much when there's stuff you can go and explore. I don't know about anyone else that's listening to this, though, but I like, it's exciting. Like, there's definitely something part of the game that I didn't really think about that much, that I'm like, wow, this is really cool and could be fun as my next character, you know, so...
cannot reiterate enough. It's amazing. The
so much
healer
fun.
game is my top tip.
Right, join the healers today, folks. Join the healers today. Join the hospital today. Right.
Come and say hi. We have cake.
Oh God, it's gonna be next event is gonna be like there'll be no one on the battlefield and just the tent, the hospital tent full of people eating cake, just cake for everyone and no fighters at all.
I mean, sometimes you have to bring your own cake, but like you can bring cake and then share it. I can't guarantee there will be cake for all, but that's more.
I'm less
the
keen now.
special
I have to
treatment
say,
that you
Ellie,
get
I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm less keen now.
Caveat in.
Yeah, I don't want to bring my own cake. I just want to be fed cake, and yeah. Anyway, shall we end it like we usually do?
Yeah, we should round that up.
Yeah.
End it there. Thank you
Strength of
so
the
much.
Empire. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Em.
thank you, Ellie. Ian, do it quick before we keep talking.
All right. Strength of the Empire.
Strength to Navarre.
Aye, I'm the owner of this homestead. I'll have to ask you to leave immediately, or I'll have you removed.
This property belongs to my friend, John Miller.
Well, he's dead. And this property was sold at auction this morning to Jebediah and Daughter Company. Here's a copy of the deed.
Father, please. We're so very sorry for your loss.
Ada, what have I told you about interrupting while Daddy is talking business?
Sorry, Father.
As far as I'm concerned, John is missing.
Missing? Ha! John's dead than Taruniel.
Have you seen his body?
Body? Well, you might find him if you poke around enough monster shit. I've had enough of this. Men, please escort these squatters off the property.
Yes, sir.
Now, let's not do anything hasty.
There are 6 of us, and only 3 of you.
Precisely, I wouldn't want any of you to get hurt.
Yarp.
Go on. What are you waiting for?
Wait, why don't we let them stay here for a night?
Rent free?
It might be cheaper than the potions we'll need to use if they refuse.
Ada, you take after Mother. May she pass the labyrinth swiftly. Fine, one night, but I'll be back in the morning with the marshal.
Well, we'll see you in the morning then.